Hello, and today it is my goal to bring value to you through education. So, we're going to talk about something that you've been hearing about in the news, and there is so much going on in the conversations. And quite honestly, I see some misinformation that I want to clear up, but I also want to unpack what's going on in the real estate industry. So, today we're going to talk about the settlement in the lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. So let's just start off by asking, what is the National Association of Realtors? It is a trade association for real estate professionals. And I am a real estate professional. My name is Sara Runyans. I'm a real estate agent with Cove Living Brokered by eXp Realty. And I am a realtor member. So if a real estate agent chooses to be a member of the National Association of Realtors, then they are a realtor. Did you know that some real estate agents are not realtors? Well, that's true. And there are real estate agents who are realtors. So what does our trade association do? Well, let's think about it for a minute. If you happen to be in any sort of profession, then you may have a trade association. Doctors, teachers, attorneys, accountants, welders. Just any sort of profession, you have a trade association. And our trade association provides education opportunities, opportunities for designations that help us to be more professional real estate agents, and so much more. And as realtor members, we are bound by a strict code of ethics. The National Association of Realtors provides rules that help us to abide by the laws of our country, such as fair housing and anti-discrimination laws, just to name a couple. So I would say that this lawsuit settlement seems in some ways to be the elephant in the room. It's something that if you're working with a real estate agent, it may be something you haven't discussed very much with them at this point, but it's something that's going to become part of the conversation. And so I think it's good to just go ahead and get this out and explain what's going on. And that's what I'm attempting to do today. So, the real estate industry has been plagued by some challenges in recent years that we as real estate agents are very well aware of. And the biggest one being something that is affecting the economy as a whole, and that is inflation of housing prices. And there's no one better aware of the pain of that than realtors, because we are walking through that day in and day out with our home sellers and our home buyers. And we see what you're dealing with, and we go through that with you. So we know that that is a struggle. So let's deal with some misconceptions, and then we're going to get more into what the lawsuit is about. One misconception came straight from the top, President Biden, when he made a statement that the 6% standard fee is now going to be negotiable. Well, that is not true. There was never a 6% standard fee. That fee is negotiable. It was always negotiable. It always has been negotiable. It is negotiable. That is the truth. And, when I went from being a school teacher, being a stay-at-home mom for a period of time, and then went into real estate, in that transition period, as I was learning about being a real estate agent, my pre-license courses, one of the things that was strongly emphasized is that there is not a set commission fee. And, it could be 6%, 5%, 7%. It could be anywhere. It could be lower than 5%. There are discount brokers out there available, and they have been out and available for people to call. But you always need to look at, what am I getting for that amount? And so, there's more to it than just putting the home in the MLS or just unlocking a door for somebody. There is so much more to it than that. And so make sure if you want to go with a discount broker that you know what you're getting. And, really the market determines our commission, because if we were not worth it, we would not be getting paid that amount because the commission is negotiable. But because we have been shown to be worth it, that is why the commission is what it ends up being. So in talking about compensation, let's break it down a little bit. It could be, 6%, it could be 5%, it could be 7%, it could be anywhere along that range. It could be more or less than any of those amounts. I'm going to take 6% just because it's an even number and easy to split. But let's break down commission. Now, it's not always an even split. Sometimes a listing agent may take 4% and give 3% to a buyer agent. We're going to get into agency in just a minute so you can understand more about that. But the breakdown of the compensation. So if we have 6% and let's say 3% goes to a buyer agent, 3% goes to a listing agent. And then let's take a look at the listing agent's expenses. Let's say that listing agent has spent hundreds and maybe even thousands of dollars paying for marketing for that property. Additionally, the listing agent has spent money to pay their qualifying broker, because to be a real estate agent, you have to be under the auspices, if you will, or under the authority of a qualifying broker. So a portion of that goes to the qualifying broker. It could be 10%, it could be 20%, it could even be 30% that goes to the qualifying broker. Then you have additional business expenses, plus you have taxes that are taken out of that. And depending on your tax bracket, it could be 30%, 40%, it may even be as much as 50% that you're taking out and putting aside to pay your taxes. So the amount that the real estate agent gets ends up getting whittled down considerably. So when you look at the closing disclosure and you see how much is going to the real estate company, because that's where the commission really goes. It goes to the company. Like when I get paid, it goes to eXp Realty. It doesn't come directly to me. And then it's broken down from there. So, so that's a little bit about commission. Now, the reason that buyer agency came about was to have more representation for the buyer. And let's talk for a minute about what the services are that a real estate agent can provide. So a real estate agent can be a transaction broker, or they can be a single agent, or they can be a limited consensual dual agent or a sub-agent. And this is a disclosure that all real estate agents have to make to their clients. It's required by law. And every state has a different law about it. But here in the state of Alabama, it's a law that we call RECAT. We don't usually tell you the name of it, but that's what it's called here in the state of Alabama. And so what that means is if I'm a transaction broker, I'm going to help you facilitate the sale. I am not going to give you my advice or my opinion if I'm a transaction broker. If I am an agent, I'm going to facilitate the sale, but more than that, I can give you my advice and opinion, and I'm going to be a fiduciary. I have a responsibility as your agent to represent you and favor you in all transactions and negotiations. And so that's what an agent does in a nutshell. Okay. Or I can be a limited consensual dual agent. If I'm in that role, that means I'm representing both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. And you may be thinking, well, how can that be? Well, in the state of Alabama, it's legal. In some states, it's not legal to do that. But in our state, it is. And so if we do that, we cannot do that unless we have the written permission from both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. If we do have that agreement, then that means that I have to then represent both sides. And it changes slightly when we have dual agency, because at that point, You know, I can't tell the seller what the buyer's willing to pay. I can't tell the buyer what the seller's willing to accept in the way of payment, among other things. And so there are a lot of boundaries that I cannot cross and things that I cannot say at that point if we are in that kind of a situation. Okay. So so that's the disclosure that has to be made. If you choose agency, then a buyer's agent, well, let's back up from it. So if you choose agency, let's say I'm a listing agent, okay? How do I provide value for the listing? Well, there are many things. I'm not going to go into all of that in this video today, but I want to give you a little story of an example where there was is a recent transaction that I had, and the seller, prior to working with me, decided that she wanted to sell the home on her own. And that's all fine and good. She can choose to do that. This is a free country, and you can do a for sale by owner. And she chose to do that. So she got to the closing table and the sale fell apart. And she didn't know what she was going to do. So then she had some friends. They reached out to me. They said, will you talk to her? I did. She said, okay, I want to list with you. So we listed the house for sale. And not only that, of course, we did many things. Like I helped her stage the house. I created a website for her property specifically. I did all kinds of marketing and advertising and open houses and all those things. Well, really one open house because we weren't open long enough to do more than one. So, so this was recent in a time when the market's gotten a little slower, but technically we're still in a seller's market. So this house ended up selling. She ended up with 2 offers on it, but we negotiated the first offer back and forth several times, and that's part of what we do. And she got it to a point where she was willing to accept it. And she, with the other offer, could have leveraged that offer to get it even higher, but she opted not to do that because she at that point had decided, I want to accept this other offer. And that's her prerogative. She can do that. And so at that point, we settled on that price. Do you know that she ended up selling this house for 36% more than she had planned on selling it as a for sale by owner when the sale fell apart? Okay, 36% more. And so that was the value that I provided. And she could have potentially gotten more. And actually, I won't go into the details, but she definitely could have gotten more for that. So this is the value that a real estate agent can provide. Okay. Now, what about buyer agency? This is what's going to be really different because of this lawsuit. I understand why this came about. It has to do with an antitrust violation. And when a house is listed in the MLS, what we have currently is that there is a listing for compensation showing what the buyer's agent is going to receive in compensation. Now, why did buyer agency even come about in the first place? Well, let's talk about that first. So back in 1994, buyer agency was established. It was that year or around in that time. And so prior to that, there was no buyer agency. It came about to address, and I'm going to read a little bit of this, an imbalance in the representation of home purchasers in real estate transactions. Traditionally, real estate agents primarily represented sellers, working to secure the best deal for the seller's interest. This arrangement left the buyers without dedicated representation, and it raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. The emergence of buyer agency aimed to rectify the situation by providing home purchasers with their own representation and raise concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Think about that. Now, have you ever thought about if you were in a legal situation representing yourself in a court of law without an attorney? Would you do that? Well, that's what buyer agents are doing in essence. It's not an attorney, but you're going without representation of a licensed professional. And so here are some additional things that and reasons why buyer agency came about. It ensures the home buyer to have an agent who's solely focused on protecting their interests throughout the transaction. And this includes helping them find suitable properties, negotiating on their behalf, and guiding them through the purchase process. Also, in the traditional seller-focused model, there was the risk of conflict of interest arising as the seller's agent had a duty to act in the seller's best interest. Buyer agency helps to mitigate these conflicts by providing buyers with dedicated representation. Buyer agency is seen as a way to provide consumers with greater protection and transparency in real estate transactions. By having their own representation, buyers can make more informed decisions and navigate the complexities of buying a home more effectively. So many states have enacted laws and regulations recognizing buyer agency and outlining the duties and responsibilities of buyer agents. This legal framework helps to establish buyer agency as a legitimate and important aspect of the real estate industry. And then also, as home buyers have become more informed and sophisticated, there was an increasing demand for dedicated representation in real estate transactions because they realized, the need for this. The more you know, right? And so overall, buyer agency was created to protect the consumer. Okay. Now, let's look at what's happening to buyer agency as a result of this lawsuit. So there was the lawsuit came about because someone who chose to sell their house listed with a listing agent, they signed a contract because the seller was having to pay the buyer agent compensation. He filed a lawsuit. Now, when did he do this? It was not at the time he signed the contract to have the listing agent list the property. It was not until closing when he looked at the closing disclosure or the settlement statement and he saw the price that he was contributing toward the buyer agency. Now, in real estate, we've kind of thought about it this way. You're paying a listing agent, and that listing agent is cooperating with a buyer agent and saying, hey, I've got this house for sale. If you'll bring me buyers, then I will compensate you for that. Okay. I don't know how you can equate that. Maybe in other industries, some people have given examples of maybe, when you're building a house and you're paying not just the builder, but the other people that help build different parts of the house. But anyway, it's not exactly the same situation because the buyer's agent is representing an opposing side in the sale. So I'm sure that, when it all boils down, they decided they needed to decouple this compensation. So what does this mean in the real estate industry? But more importantly, what does this mean for you, the consumer? This year, 2024, mid-July, the MLS is no longer going to be able to show that there is any compensation at all for a buyer's agent. Does that mean buyer agency is going to go away? Well, no, it does not mean buyer agency is going away, but it does mean that we're going to look at it a different way. Does that mean that prices are going to go down because that commission is no longer showing in the MLS? Probably not. And I'll explain that more here in a minute. If it's an attempt for prices to go down, or if people think that was the intent of this lawsuit, I don't know if it was the intent of the lawsuit, but I think primarily it was to decouple the commission. But some people are talking like, oh, it's going to make it cheaper now to sell your house. Well, really? We're going to talk about that. So if a buyer agent commission can no longer be shown in the MLS, then how are buyer agents going to be paid? The way it's going to change it, this is going to be everywhere. It's not just me. It's not just my brokerage. It's not just, this area. This is across the entire United States. When you go to work with a real estate agent, you want to call up that buyer agent and say, hey, I'm ready to start looking at houses. Well, that buyer's agent is going to need to have a consultation with you. Now, I already have consultations with all of my buyers, but there's going to be another piece to that conversation. And that is, we are going to be requesting that the buyers pay the buyer's agent commission. Does that mean the buyer is going to have to pay the buyer's agent commission? Well, that all depends. Just because compensation cannot be listed in the MLS does not mean that the seller cannot pay compensation. So if the seller agrees to pay compensation, they can do that. But that's going to be a conversation that has to take place off of the MLS. And so some sellers can say, yes, I am going to cover some compensation for the buyer agent. But by the same token, the seller can say, I'm not going to pay a buyer's agent commission. All right, let's think about this for a minute. The buyer's agents are the ones who bring people to come see your property when it's for sale. And we have a really great method of coordinating those showings, and it works very seamlessly for the most part. So what's a buyer to do? Okay, well, the buyer can either hire an agent, or the buyer can go on their own and call the listing agent. So that means the listing agent's job has changed, and the listing agent may have to charge more in commission just simply because they're going to be doing more footwork. They're going to be having to maybe do a sort of a mini agreement with that buyer before they come in. They can't just show them the house without any sort of conversation. Or will they be able to show the house without any sort of a conversation at all? It's possible that they will need to do a consultation with that buyer, but they're not representing that buyer. And when that buyer wants things to be done, who's going to do that? Who's going to draft an offer for them and put that offer in? Is it going to be the listing agent? Well, if that's going to happen, then the listing agent's going to have to come up with some sort of an agreement with that buyer. And we've already talked a little bit about agency and limited consensual dual agency and all of that. So I'm not going to discuss that much more, but these are things that have to be thought about. What about first-time home buyers, or those who may not have a lot of money going in to make their home purchase? Not only are they going to have the down payment and closing costs, but they also now are looking at paying the fee for a buyer's agent. So let's say they agree to pay the buyer's agent fee, and the buyer's agent says, okay, let's go. And they start looking at homes. And now they've narrowed it down to maybe 3 homes that they like and they're considering. 2 of the homes, the fee for the buyer agent is covered by the seller. 1 home, it's not covered in this scenario. So then I'm going to be preparing for my buyers a net sheet, breaking down the cost that they will have for each of these homes. They're going to look at the bottom line. And what if it turns out that they're paying, that they're doing better by buying the house where the seller is paying the buyer agent fee? Then it's not going to be me directing them to that house. It's going to be them deciding on that house, because they're going to see that they're not having to come out of pocket with as much cash at closing, or that it's not going to cost them as much in the big picture. So even if we are bringing buyers to you that are paying our fee or willing to pay our fee, then they make a decision about which house to purchase based upon if the buyer agency fee is covered by the seller or not. And this has nothing to do with the agent's decision. Okay, it's the buyer's decision. So there are a lot of rabbit trails that we can run down with this, but I just want you to know that some changes are coming about. Are they for the better? I don't feel like they are. And I can't tell you many real estate agents who would say they think that they are. Here's one positive. I'm probably not going to have as many people come to me and say, hey, can you show me this house? Can you show me that house? Because I'm going to have a consultation with them and get a commitment from them before I can start doing that now. Whereas before, I could have a little bit of a conversation and we could see a few houses and then we could sign an agreement, but knowing that more than likely they were not going to have to pay my compensation. So that's where we are. And again, I could unpack this more and probably will in the future. If any questions about it that you'd like to know more about, please let me know and I'd be happy to answer those questions and perhaps feature it on a future video. But for today, that is all that I have for you about the NAR lawsuit and all of the complexities to an extent that we are looking at. So I hope this was helpful information for you. I like to provide value for my clients and customers. And this is not something that I just was jumping at the chance to share because it's not to me a great thing, but I am not a half glass empty kind of gal. I'm a glass half full kind of person. And so I am choosing to focus on the positives of this. And then we will see how it goes. I hope it's going to work out well for everyone, but that remains to be seen. So my name is Sara Runyans. I am with Cove Living, brokered by eXp Realty. I meet your real estate needs with skill, service, and a smile.